The thing about virtual production is it flips the paradigm on its head, right? We are doing the post-production in pre. Therefore, the cadence of that communication is inverted. And a fringe benefit of that is a lot of times with the old school VFX pipeline, the cinematographer was sort of not included all the time. It was sort of aced out. And so you have other technicians, other artists making decisions that impact the photography. They, no, we're shooting blue screen, can't add any smoke. We'll put the smoke in later.
Yeah.
To what taste?
Hello, you're watching and listening to the voice of virtual production, an exclusive series by Synapse and Little Black Book. Across the episodes of this video interview series, we'll hear from industry-leading experts about how the world of production's transforming and discover how to get the most out of cutting-edge virtual production tech. My name's Adam Bennett and I'm a writer at Little Black Book. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing all things lighting, how to devise the perfectly lit virtual production set, the practicalities of merging virtual production with practical shoots, and asking what's possible at the cutting edge of this technology. I'm thrilled to be joined by two perfect guests with whom to have those conversations. Returning to the show is Synapse's Chief Innovation Officer, Christopher Probst, ASC. You've seen his work in the likes of David Fincher's Mindhunter series for Netflix, ads for brands like Nike, Google, and BMW, and music videos for Ariana Grande, Eminem, Taylor Swift, and more. Christopher, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you again, Adam. Thank you.
Welcome back. And we're also fortunate enough to be joined by Jeff Webster. In the world of virtual production, there might not be any other gaffer with as many prestigious credits as Jeff. His work can be seen on the likes of The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and the upcoming Mandalorian and Grogu feature film. Additionally, Jeff lists chief lighting credentials on TV series such as Legion and Dear White People, as well as feature films like Incarnate and Greenland and many more. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Christopher and Jeff, would I be right in saying that virtual production has opened up a new world of lighting possibilities? And if so, what are they?
You want to take that?
Yeah. A whole new world of lighting. I mean, it definitely is a step forward, I would say. I think for me, the main improvement on, say, shooting on like a blue screen or a green screen stage is reflections.
Yeah.
Huge. Like for me, that's the one thing you can't get any other way. And I think that would probably be the number one benefit from my side.
Yeah, from an actor's perspective, you think about the dismal experience of being in some green screen void for weeks on end and having some stage technician with a tennis ball on a pole charging at them and saying, imagine that this is the amazing, alien landscape and creature coming at you, and it's all like they having to suspend their own, disbelief and trying to imagine this versus being in an environment and being immersed in these things. Not only that they're experiencing this periphery reality, but all the tonalities are flying around and also lighting them. So we're talking about lighting this episode, and it's indeed throwing photons. Not only is it replacing what would be a composite of a blue screen or a green screen asset, but it's also throwing photons around. And we'll talk about the merits of the quality of those photons separately, but it is providing a base level of illumination, and with reflective surfaces. And if you're dealing with, a traditional VFX pipeline where you have an actor with very thick rimmed glasses and like frizzy hair, like two things that are a nightmare for compositors to deal with. The hair gets truncated, and try to create the complexities of the refracting light of the background that's going to be composited later into the glasses, which sometimes may actually invert the image, or it's astigmatic and compresses the image. All those things that happen when it's not exactly obeying the laws of physics correctly, the audience may not know, like, oh, well, that actor's wearing, astigmatic lenses, and the image that's in his glasses that was composited doesn't look correct. They just feel that something's off. And that's when you tick that uncanny box, and it's just like, it didn't look right, or it didn't, the VFX sucked. And they use the term special effects, but it's not even that. Special effects is atmosphere on set, or a flame bar. Visual effects is all of these aspects that we are talking about today.
Yeah, and I think having, like you said, the full immersive environment where like normally you'd have a softbox, blue screen, a scissor lift with another softbox on it. You're essentially lighting different sections of the set instead of having a perfectly lit ambient illumination.
Yep.
So like having that ambient level, having the reflections, like for us on Mandalorian, you have a guy in a metal costume.
Yeah.
Doing that on a blue screen stage kind of sucks. But having this, every highlight shows up in his reflection. I think that to me is like the major step forward.
One aspect that was very unique with your with Mandalorian, for example, is because he's literally wearing a chrome mirror ball, right? Like the VFX guys go out and put a mirror ball in to harness what all the lighting conditions are to be able to recreate that on a CG element in post. Well, the guy's wearing it the whole fucking time, so that becomes a challenge. So they designed your volume very specifically to encompass the actor for all those reflective surfaces that the guy is wearing.
Yes.
Not every volume that stage that exists in the world is built the same way. There's different panels, different sort of layout configurations. So there's certain bespoke aspects for a production that fit the need of that content. And so that was very specific for you. But the benefit of it was also you had that immersion that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. You had the ability to open up the back wall, right? That was on like a little gantry system that would fly in.
The front wall.
Yeah. So you could enclose if you needed to, but then you have this big surround environment. But again, so now you have all these sort of these tones flying around. And when we had Greg Fraser on the first episode of this podcast series, he talked about wanting to harness that as much as possible because anytime you add in a light fixture, whether it be on a practical set or on a virtual production stage, it's a cheat. Right, and he called it a level of false, right? So then you're sort of adding a shadow or a highlight or a directionality of light to try to augment something, and then that introduces its own sort of artifacts. The amplified example of that is the old school, when it came out of black and white photography, and they started to try to do color photography, and you had people like it was all this like 3-point lighting and playing the lights off a grid, and you had shadows like crisscrossing across people's faces, and it looked very artificial because it exactly was. You had a 2K here, and then, this is too dark here. They weren't dealing with soft sources because of the ASA of the film stock. They put another light here, but now you have a less shadow on this side and a primary shadow on this side. You're literally digging your own grave of like, oh my God, now I got all these shadows now, and I got to start to figure out how to cut it or modify it to ameliorate all these artifacts that are giving away the gag. With virtual production, you're having all those tones sort of built in, and I loved it like, especially sort of out of the 70s British gaffers and DPs coming out, really were able to harness soft light. Yeah. I think because of the dreary English weather that you have there, Adam, they become the masters at looking at all these rap light, Michael Saracen and certainly Roger Deakins and even to a degree, like if you go back into Gil Taylor from the first Star Wars movie was doing crazy stuff with fluorescence in the 60s with Dr. Strangelove. But using soft light, right, and be able to mold that. And that is what this is due, because the panels don't project a beam of light. They are not like a Fresnel fixture, right? You're not gonna get a big shaft of light coming out of the panels. Even if you have the sun in shot, it's not gonna project that big shadow. But what it is a diffused source. So by nature, diffused means softened, right? So we get these soft tonalities on, then the trick becomes how do we get those hard light aspects.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm sort of jumping the gun here, but I think it's all relevant to the topic.
So what are the instances where you would feel that a practical set would still be preferable for lighting?
I think specifically what we're talking about, hard light. If you want a big bright sun source, overhead sun, you can't do that in the volume. That's kind of that's like the most difficult thing for us to do is figure out how to get a full even spread of daylight in a volume with hard shadow.
Yeah.
That's always been the most difficult. So oftentimes we'll lean into like a backlot set, or we'll do a stage rig where at least I can get the sun all the way in that corner and cover and blanket the set.
Yeah. And
get that source as far away as possible to get the hardest shadow. So I'd say hard sun is when I would shoot on a real set. Although we can do hard sun in the volume. It's just, it's better to be broken up. It's better to have pockets of sun versus a blanket of sun.
To nerd out even a bit more, there's a phenomenon called the inverse square law, right? And so what you're battling with believable recreation of daylight, which has two components, by the way. You always have the sky, which is a different color temperature than the sun itself, right? So you need to build in that duality of tones. So it's a lot of times you'll rig big bounces and have that be a bluer color temperature than than the sunlight. But inverse square law means that the intensity of the light changes with the inverse of the square of its distance. What that equates to in practical terms, it means if I put a 1K right here by my face, and the distance is very small, I can get a very big variance in exposure. It would be blowing out overexposed and at key here, right? The way to make that a more even playing field is if I take that 1K 30 feet away, I can move a vast amount of distance and the exposure on me doesn't change because the inverse of the square of that distance is a very marginal factor. So to create believable sunlight, what he's talking about is we want a large source as far away as possible to create a very even field that the actors can play in without feeling the exposure change. So one of the tricks that you deal with that, and I believe you guys incorporate a lot, is like bouncing a light into a mirror. And so you're increasing the distance of that source. So you're doing maybe 20 feet into a mirror and then then that beam is projecting another 40 feet instead. So now it's effectively 60 feet away instead of only 40 feet away. So that increases the evenness of the playing field. And also you can also have like a more directional shaft of light if you wanted to, pull some panels off of the back wall and have a beam of light coming in. I've seen on some of the BTS you guys do, like where there's like a really big hot source on the sky. Amid that really hot source, that's where you pull the panels and put in like vortexes through it. Or
yeah, we've done 20Ks, 18Ks in the mirrors, like you were saying. Yeah, the mirrors are a great trick. It's kind of going more old school, but I think it works in an environment where you don't have enough space. We've even put like a 18K on the ground behind the volume up into mirrors. They're kind of pointing straight up to get that distance,
right?
As that lengthen that distance.
So you're still using like incredibly sort of practical filmmaking tools? Because I wanted to ask a question about, do you find that the tools you reach for differ when you're working in a fully virtual production environment versus a fully practical environment?
I don't know. I feel like they're pretty similar. I mean, my lighting package is the same across all stages. When we show up in the volume, they're pretty much the same. I think originally we started out being like, oh, we need full color LED because we need to be able to match the volume as closely as possible. But as we started trying new things and evolving, our lighting language, I think we realized, oh, let's go back to tungsten. Let's see how that maybe that full spectrum light coming in can offset a little bit of the truncated spectrum of the video wall.
Yeah.
And I think just being able to use all your tools is nice, like 18Ks for daylight balance because the volume is it's its best form in D65 daylight. Right. So you're getting the brightest output, the best color. That's why we normally go with daylight balanced fixtures or HMIs. LEDs are usually maximized for 5600. So we've also shifted the volume to 3200 for a couple sets, which was kind of weird. Definitely dimmed the overall volume down, but it was a fun experiment.
And to extrapolate on that even more, like, we're not reinventing the wheel, right? Even this technique, and I've mentioned many times, is an evolution of all sorts of legacy techniques. We mentioned like painted backings. Well, that's a backing. It's just not painted. It's actually a motion dynamic and it's emitting light. We don't have to front light it, but it's still a backdrop, right? And that's what a green screen or blue screen is. That's going to get replaced and composited in. Or trans lights, like rear illuminated trans lights or front illuminated. It's all the same sort of ideas. Even car process, rear projection. Well, that's not really a projection, it's a display, but it's again, a backdrop that's in motion, right? So the same thing applies to lighting tools, right? So we are using these techniques, and I love the idea when you leverage experience and sort of ideas that have been tried and true in the industry and craft, and maybe putting a new spin on it in a new way, but like, hey, we can use this tool to do a new thing. Like we've been bouncing lights into mirrors for ages to do that very thing on big sets. If you think about like a Ridley Scott set, you would have these big shafts of light. I mean, and they'd be doing the same thing into a mirror. So it's not like we're reinventing it. I think perhaps certainly in the last decade, there's been a evolution to more LED-based fixtures anyway, regardless if it's practical or virtual. It plays nice in the virtual because we're LED panels. Now, maybe this is not the time, but you mentioned in terms of the spectrum of the lights, the actual LED fixtures as illuminants are designed to try to give you as full a spectrum as it would a glowing body like a tungsten source, right? When that tungsten filament heats up and glows, it's producing all the wavelengths of light that comprise the white light that you want. So that means that skin tone looks good. It's be able to bounce back all the tones that light would hit, right? What we see in terms of color, we're both pretty monochromatic right now, but you need to have that wavelength if you want to have that reflected back so that our eyes pick it up, it needs to be present. What happens with the LED screens is they are limited spectrum. The panels actually, as a display, look their best when there's 3 color channels, red, green, and blue, right? And actually they profile them, so if you take a waveform spectrometer on it, right, and you look at what the output of those each 3 diodes are doing, the red spike that you get from the red diode, the less it actually spreads out and crosses in the other channels, it actually performs better as they can isolate each color channel, right? So you don't want what's called crosstalk. So they're actually trying to isolate each channel. But what that means as an illuminant, as a lighting source, is it's missing a big chunk. So between the blue and the green, you have a blue spike and a green spike, and you're missing a chunk which is cyan. And then between the green and the red, you're missing these yellows and oranges and ambers. Well, guess where does skin tone reside for a lot of different skin types, right? Is in that region. And so you'll get into a phenomenon called metamerism, which is because the illuminant is missing these wavelengths. If it hits a tonality that is that color, it doesn't have the wavelength to bounce back to create that color faithfully. So it may hypersaturate a color in a weird way, like certain reds and oranges can go like nuclear in a funky way and not be the proper color. And certainly there's deficiencies in the cyan that also do some funkiness. And also with skin tone, the hardest thing in CG is to create believable skin, right? Because you have an overall complexity of skin tone and freckles and different things. Like Adam, your cheeks are a little flushed, right? But also there's called subsurface scattering. Like when you blush, the under layers of your dermis saturate with blood. It's complex. There's greens and yellows and oranges and magentas and stuff, and everyone's skin tone is different. And if you're missing wavelengths to recreate that or to do that in CG, it looks plasticky, it looks false, right? And the whole idea of this trying to create this verisimilitude of reality. We're on a bogus backdrop, right? Trying to say we're on an alien planet and we're having limited light flying around. So then it becomes this sort of this juggle, right? You have a limited spectrum and you also want to harness these photons that are coming out of the panels, but then you're putting in these sources. So now do we sort of overpower that and bring in full spectrum so skin tone looks good? Do we bias the camera to try to neutralize that deficiency and then maybe limit how much of full spectrum we introduce? Yeah. It's just sort of tightrope, right? And I'm sure you guys played a lot with that in season 1, right?
Definitely.
And creating your LUT and.
Oh yeah. I mean, at first we barely lit in the volume. Yeah. It was like, let's just use it as it is, soft light, sunsets, all that worked
Magic
great.
hour galore.
Yeah, exactly. Love it. So that was kind of like our safe, like season 1 was kind of like we played into the benefits of a volume. We played into its hand, but then kind of as we've moved forward, we've kind of gotten more into hard light and things like that. And so now we kind of lean away from just lighting purely with the volume. I think there's certain sets, especially with like a Mandalorian helmet, we're dealing with reflections. We don't want to introduce a bunch of light sources.
Yeah, you'll see them ping.
You're dealing with pings. They're having to roto it out, paint out the helmet later. Like that's a pain. But I think with skin tones, I'd always prefer to light a face with a full spectrum, a vortex, sky panel, something like that that's going to give it a tungsten, some DPs love that, So I think giving it the most spectrum possible for skin tones, foreground stuff, great. I think background stuff that isn't super saturated, I think you can light with the volume specifically.
There are sort of like post-production, like LUTs and stuff that you could take a charted measurement of that hypersaturated red and then map it to read properly. And you guys created initially a LUT that was helping bias the camera to recreate those tones as it was efficiently recorded to map into a better color space. So I think the best of both worlds is try to like span that a little bit, right? You're not going to overpower it. You're going to try to harness it. But the next sort of generation that's happening right now is we're introducing panels that are fuller spectrum. So, and there's 2 sort of modes of dealing with that. There is RGBW, where they introduce a white diode. And there's different types of white diodes. There's phosphor white or versus just a normal white LED. And then there's also different additive color diodes that you can add in, like RGB-CA, where they add in that cyan and the amber.
And a lime too, right? They're adding a lime in there too?
Yeah, sometimes they do a lime as well, because there's the cyan, and also like a lime also helps with certain tonalities. Ironically, you don't think like skin tone needs cyan, but it actually really helps. Oh, nice. So there's a company called 6P that are doing like a 6-color LED panel that they're developing for this fuller spectrum. What that means in terms of a on-camera display is sort of evolving, because like I said, they've designed the panels to be a display and also a backdrop that the camera can photograph in just those RGB channels. But if you think about like ceilings or off-camera panels being full spectrum and still being interactive, still having the content and displaying, but throwing out those better wavelengths, but are still fully interactive with the asset that you're in. I think that's, at least in the media future, the next level. Like maybe when we cut to a wide shot, we're going to be adding in what we're calling a downstage brow that fills in this gap on our ceiling right now, that will have a kind of like a 45-degree a strip that will marry into the reflections.
Like tiltable?
Tiltable, yeah, nice. Articulatable, but also being RGBW. So nice. I use the example that if I'm shooting an actor on our volume stage, I don't necessarily care that I don't have full spectrum hitting the back of my head. I'm not photographing the back of my head, but what I am photographing is my skin tone. So by having sort of like an interactive LED full video source panel that has fuller spectrum, and it's going to introduce those wavelengths as part of the interactive content that's built into the volume sort of wholesale, then I'm still going to come in with my lights on the floor and do my augmentation, put practicals in or build in stuff into set pieces. That's all happening again anyway, but I have an organic sort of already out of the box. When I turn on the volume, I have some fuller tones flying around. So that's the next sort of the level, is be fun to play with.
Yeah. Color seems to be the next evolution of a virtual production, especially in the volume.
With all of this stuff to consider, is there any extent to which an LED volume is plug in and play when it comes to lighting?
No.
I mean,
that's okay. You can say no.
There's more than one way to skin a cat, and every DP is going to have their own opinions, right? So, and you know, there was a saying that we had in the CineLens book that you know, one man's doorstop is another man's Oscar, right? When these lenses that hadn't been used for 60 years were collecting dust in some retired DP's garage, suddenly becomes a $500,000 lens set, and people are creating gorgeous images out of it. Who's to say that that lens is not relevant, right? So it's what the artist and what the craftsman does with it. Like I mentioned with Greg, like I love the fact that he takes a $50 eBay lens and does Oscar nominated in award-winning work with some Russian optic that he has rehoused. So anything's on the table. It's like, that's artistic expression. What's your brush? And this is just another brush in the toolkit. Yeah. And certainly not the brush to do everything with. And we don't try to sell that every single shot should be done in virtual production.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's, I think a common mistake that people make is they show up on the day of a volume shoot and expect it to work out of the box. I've been on commercials where, oh, we're doing a virtual production shoot, we're going to throw a car in here. Oh, don't worry, we got some content. And then they throw it up, and you're like, did anybody look at this prior to this morning? And then we spend half the day reworking it, or they have to go shoot another day because the content wasn't right. And I think a lot of people expect to show up and it just work. And I think that's a common mistake that I hear. And I think prep for me and the reason you're shooting in a virtual production environment is because you want to know what you're getting ahead of time. And having that ability to prep, know what the sets are going to look like, you can light it ahead of time, you can put VR headsets, you can scout it with other people. I mean, you have this full suite of prep, use it. And I think, I don't know, I've heard of too many people showing up and it not working on the day, and not realizing why.
Part of the impetus to even create this podcast series is about the dissemination of information, educating people about how this process works at its best, right? We don't want any instance, whether it's on my stage here at Synapse or anywhere, having a failed virtual production, because I think it puts a bad skew on the technique. And I don't want to be on a green screen stage anymore. I'd rather be here. So I don't want to have a burned UPM saying, no, we are not going to a virtual stage. It's not worth it. It's more expensive, and let's just do blue screen. Well, in fact, it can be more economical if you do it smartly. Yes. So that's the communication, both in terms of the actual stage, the optimization of the assets that are created, whether or not it's created in-house or as a separate VAD vendor that's creating the environments that are going to go on the panels, the virtual art department. That has to then be brought into the stage and run, and then possibly reworked and optimized. For every stage, it needs to be bespoke, right? If you know you're going to be bringing an environment and it needs to be configured and built to the size and shape of the volume, a thing within Unreal Engine is called the end display. So that's the map of the physical geometry of that volume. If you've got a 20-foot wide set in a 90-foot volume, how is that going to, like, the proportions are not going to, you can't have the wall be 40 feet away from where it would physically want to be. You'd either have to skew the set over and shoot only in one corner to accommodate that and maybe bring a wild wall in, but those sort of ideas have to be communicated and adjusted for, as well as what frame rate do you want to shoot at? Like, is this asset performant at the frame rate? Is it even hitting 24 frames? Exactly. And if you want to do some slow-mo, you've got to build in headroom. And what it does when you bring up an environment within Unreal Engine at, the VAD company is one thing. Oh, we're hitting, 48 frames. Then you put it up on the volume and it goes. Yep. So you have to build in headroom, right? Because it's going to take a performance hit when it has to actually drive the video processors and the panels and all the peripheral hardware that this signal has to snake through. So that's a factor. That optimization, that vetting needs to happen beforehand. You don't want to get caught with your pants down the moment you walk in the set, right? So that's super important, and having that communication is sort of vital and key to the success of the process.
Definitely. I think the communication, I really want to drive that point home of you're dealing with another department essentially with this the virtual production team. You have your brain bar, we call it, but it's now you have the virtual art department, and it's just this pipeline of communication it's different, it's new, it's especially for me as a gaffer, you're not used to talking to this whole other department.
Yeah, it's like the VFX department.
Exactly, but it's in prep, and you're discussing things with them. I'm hitting them up in prep, dealing with, hey, we want to control these lights, specifically these lights. Can I have DMX control over these little fixtures in the set? Can we add a little hotspot in the background there that's live lit, not baked into the content where we can't tweak it later? Right. And it's that collaboration process, having a good relationship with your VAD team, with your brain bar, I think those are priceless.
Right, well,
priceless.
And even look like right now, we got these spinning little klaxon lights, we got fluorescent tubes on the wall. Well, guess what? That would have been in the domain of the practical lighting gaffer, but now it's part of the production design of the virtual asset. But there's a handoff there, right? And also there's a collaboration. You can say look, the DP and the gaffer maybe we really need, I need a half light source. Can we build in a sconce or a glowing panel that I can use that's actually part of the virtual asset, but it's going to also light my talent. So now you're doing what would have been a fixtures rigger or
set
dimmer board operator. Sometimes also the dimmer board want to be part of the building of the cueing and the cadence of animations of these lights. Maybe the dimmer board operator wants to control the spin of that klaxon light, right? And be able to program for that. So there's this, again, the communication and the handoff. And what's really exciting is, and I don't know how much you guys play with, is actually starting to light the foreground, the actual practical part, in Unreal Engine as part of the prep, right? So you have whatever built into the virtual environment, and you're helping maybe collaborate and design practicals that are part of the virtual environment. But you also have this situation where you have this imaging engine that can also sort of scout and pre-light what's going to happen in the foreground. So now it's hey, let's bring in a 20 by source, and it will follow the rules of photometrics, right? You can have it obey the laws of physics, right? So if you put this fixture in with this level of output, it's going to light the scene this way. So now you're scouting, and that's something that when we talked with Greg about on Dune, for example, he was doing virtual lighting in Unreal Engine, not necessarily virtual production for the actual photography, but virtual production for the planning and the staging and the coordination and the communication, which is another huge application of this. Is all the idea of this is all sort of disseminating information and opening up a level of communication where, I don't know how old school, the cinematographer used to be the on-set wizard. No one knew what he was doing with this monocle and a ball and reading some numbers and I don't know what he's doing. And they go to the dailies and be hell? Like, how did he do that?
Exactly.
It's incredible. Now it's been like democratized where you got a committee looking at a HD monitor instead of going, I thought it would be brighter, or like, is that what that's gonna look like? And it's like, so my idea was like, oh my God, like especially in commercials, we have like this total like committee of clients and agencies. Is like, back in the day, there was a camera, the Arri 3, and it had this Jurgen's video tap. But the camera didn't even come with a video tap. You had to have a third party make one for it. And the viewfinder was so terrible, it had a ground glass, and you had a spinning mirror, which was flicker, and it was a really flickery ground glass. Like the cameras got better with less flicker. Like the 535 was like an amazing, like bright viewfinder. The Arri 3, not so much. And it had these little metal bars that held the ground glass in place, these little light baffles. And then you had the ground glass, which was, it had like fall off and it was grainy, and then the Jurgen's tap, and it had these bars through it. And you had this flickering image. The HD camera, or not with the standard def camera, didn't have like an anti-flicker mode. So it was a flickery, grainy, black and white image. And I want to create that, a little box that we take our HD signal to the client, run it through video tap, and send them that Arri 3 image and say, well, no, that's what you get. You get video tap.
Yeah, you don't want to see what
we get to do
Exactly.
the HD picture, but you get to look at the grainy black and white, flickering video tap
You
image.
got to trust us.
I thought we were shooting this in color. No, you get video tap. You'll see it in post later. Because we've lost that sort of authorship. Or like, just trust me, it's going to look better. Or like, maybe there's a process where you need to do a manipulation of something like, you're gonna grab a blue sky and you're gonna invert it in post and make it purple, right? Well, they're not gonna see the purple sky on set unless you do some weird elaborate like LUTing and all this sort of stuff. So maybe like that's not part of your process as a cinematographer, and everyone's now gonna start to chime in and comment on that. So I miss the aspect of the autonomy and the authorship, right? So in some ways, this technology increasing is sort of stripping us of the mysticism of the technique of cinematography, and to effect, like we're seeing like we're on some future world, it's all happening, but at the same time it's opening up that communication and that collaboration and allowing us to create even more believable and more advanced, more special realizations of stuff. Like what George Lucas pulled off with Star Wars was if you were alive at that time and saw that movie in the theater, there was nothing like that. And how the hell did they do this? It was techniques that had never been done before, to a level that had never been done before. And now it's just like, you're looking at like, Iron Man 3 and going, that looks a little funky with the animation. Like our perception level, that uncanny valley has become so critical.
Yeah.
You think like you could pull the wool over the audience's eyes, but whether they know it or not, they're very savvy. So
we talk about that a lot, is like, the audience is smart. They can pick up on, why does that background look a little flat? Why, that specular hit doesn't seem right. They probably can't communicate that.
Yep.
But they can feel it. And I do the same thing. I mean, every viewer does that. So I think we're always trying to be aware of that with a virtual background. Because it's easy. It's like, at least in a real set, going back to the real versus virtual, at least in a real set, the wall is there. The defocusing of that wall looks right. The way the light, if you put a light in it, the light physics is real. But when you're on a virtual background, that light, that wouldn't actually behave like that.
Yeah. That
wall looks fake. That perspective is wrong. And I think a lot of those things can just show up. And us standing at the monitor, that's half our day, is standing there being like, what isn't right? What feels wrong? And it's a lot of that, like your bullshit meter.
That's that taste level that you cultivate over a lifetime of observing and watching movies or art. As an audience member, like, the dream is that you forget everything you know about filmmaking and you're actually just able to enjoy the movie. Like I don't want to analyze like, why is that shot going soft? Like the focus puller bungled that move. It's like I just want to be immersed in the film, right? So if I can forget about technique, that is the dream. And so when you have that, it's such a pleasure because it's like, oh, I'm actually just really enjoying this. I'm in this world. I'm immersed in this world. I'm feeling it. So that's the goal. And I think everything that we can do to strip the artifice of what we're doing, this lie of telling a story and making edits, like our world, we walk around, we don't have edits, right? So I think even like the first films, when there was edits, it had to been like a jarring phenomenon for people, right? Yeah. I think when they did the first little silent films with a train coming at people were running away in the theater, like thinking it was gonna come out of the screen and plow them over. They're like, what is this thing? Like, it's like, science is like, every little iteration of science is like complete science fiction and like mythology to previous generations, right? So this is sort of another evolution of the technique that we can help create that believability and that experience level, right? So I like that, and it puts the authorship back in the hands of the filmmakers, the creatives, right? Because they're seeing the visual effects, they're seeing the composite, the actors are seeing the environment. So I think from that aspect alone, I love this technique.
Yeah, I agree.
But for you to get to that level of immersion, is it helpful for you guys to come in, say, like as content is being built in Unreal Engine, like that early on? Is that helpful for you?
Yeah. Ideally, it would be, as early as possible, I would say. I don't know if there's an exact time frame, but like on our last movie, I was probably looking at VR, in the VR scouting, I was looking at loads like 3 months out, 4 months out from shooting. And they weren't all they weren't all volume loads. Some of them were just like a stage rig that we really wanted to dial in. But it was super helpful because I was able to be in there with the cinematographer and talk through just general lighting vibes. And then I would bring in my rigging gaffer and we would talk about how we would rig it. There was actually one set where we built the entire set, we lit everything, and then we realized, we actually didn't need to build that much. And so we ended up, not we, but like art department saved a bunch of money because they realized that they only had to build a quarter of the set. It's like, this is all just gonna be VFX later.
Right.
Let's not build a practical set. So it saves money in certain regards. And then for me, it's nice to be able to visualize it, prep it. I get my drafts person in there. We're able to actually export the Unreal projects to my drafts person. And then he can open that on his laptop and we can start drafting in Vectorworks based off of that. And it's just this, again, that communication workflow. It's like I almost don't want to go back. And like Greg Fraser, I know, did that on Dune. Just you're able to know about things so far ahead of time, even if it's not a volume load. And I think I almost want to implement that just in my own department.
Right.
Start getting Unreal going for just testing out lighting rigs and seeing what works and what doesn't, especially with all the ray tracing that's getting so good now, and all the digital twins with like the virtual lighting that we're able to do. So your question, I would say, as early as possible. I mean, I know that not every project can afford, a gaffer being on that early, but I mean, even on a commercial, if the DP and the gaffer, it doesn't always have to be the gaffer, but on a longer term show, I'd say the gaffer should be there for some of it.
Job security,
Gaffer should always be there, but I'd say as early as possible. Because there are benefits, huge benefits.
The thing about virtual production is it flips the paradigm on its head, right? We are doing the post-production in pre. Therefore, the cadence of that communication is inverted. And a fringe benefit of that is a lot of times with the old school VFX pipeline, the cinematographer was sort of not included all the time. It was sort of aced out. And so you have other technicians, other artists making decisions that impact the photography. No, we're shooting blue screen, can't add any smoke. We'll put the smoke in later.
Yeah.
To what taste?
Exactly.
And to how much bloom and halation around the lights that I would have actually crafted if I were on set. No, you can't, we're adding in a whole matte painting back there. Well, what is it backlit? Is it front lit? Like, who's making that decision?
We'll make that decision later.
Yeah, but I'm not there now. I'm on another job, and do you want to pay me to come in for, to light the visual effects later? All these different elements that go in, you just have to trust the VFX supervisor or the artist taste level. But now, because it has to be on the screen, I need to be brought in earlier to help make those creative decisions, and now I get to opine on those decisions and craft the lighting with the art director, with the VAD department, with the director, and all in creating this this seamless integration of the two, because we're going to be capturing it live. And so the idea of then is, how do I protect that as much as possible? I want the integrity of this image to carry all the way through this idea of in-camera visual effects or final pixel. So I think that's also an evolution, and something that we've done at Synapse's stages is try to create as final a pixel as possible. The panels are getting better and better as we go generationally, like, still following that Moore's law curve. So now, the pixel pitches are getting finer, which means we can have it be more in focus. We can avoid moire. We don't have to have it be defocused, as well as viewing angle. If you look at the design of our stage, for example, we have a sort of a seamless integration of the ceiling to the wall. And I don't put any tracking system cameras up there that I have to paint out in post. Initially, a lot of virtual production stages were using the ceiling as maybe just an emissive light source or as a reflective light source, but not as a photographable source, right? So the choices of the hardware and the panels that they're using was indicative of that philosophy. So they would use a different pixel pitch up there. Maybe it's a much, a different product that's designed for outdoor, because it has much more volume of output, thinking like we need bright skies, so we need to have, a 10,000 nit panel up there, right? Versus when you turn this whole thing on, even like a 2,000 or 1,500 nit volume, pure white is pretty blinding, especially to the cameras as they're becoming more and more sensitive. So the idea of maximizing the in-camera aspects of this in-camera visual effects and not having to do additional visual effects in post, which we've already flipped and tried to be doing it in pre and getting it in camera, is a super important part of my philosophy of virtual production. Is I want to author it, I want to capture it, I want to protect it, right? Yeah. So that's where we're going in terms of like talking about fuller spectrum, is getting that being as perfect as possible camera, getting the skin tone, so we're not having to do these sort of Herculean efforts to fix the image later, right? And that's where all the technology is also increasing too.
As we're coming up against time for the end of the episode, there was one more question that I wanted to put to you both, which was just about, are there any examples that you'd like to discuss from your experience where something was particularly challenging or you had to overcome some kind of hurdle to change the way that you were lighting, maybe to achieve more naturalism or interactivity with the virtual environment or the assets?
I want to hear this from you because you've got a lot of different doozies, I'm sure.
There's so many little things, it's hard to pinpoint one that was like an ideal. I think there's a few, I would say we do a lot of moving light sources. So I think for me, there's like an evolution of that. We started out with like a GF8 crane with a light on it. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, we want a little bit more activity. Let's do a techno crane. Now the lighting on the ship that we're seeing isn't quite matching. Let's put a tracker on the light. And now we can do live shadow tracking on some of the outside of the ship. So the sun's moving in tandem, the background, the sky's moving with the way that our physical light is moving on the techno crane. And then we did one, there was a setup on Boba Fett where we had like an arch. We built an arch over a spaceship because we were gonna be traveling through a canyon. And there was gonna be, he was gonna be doing some barrel rolls, full barrel rolls, which is very hard to do with a techno crane, Yeah. So we realized that if we built an arch rig we used vortexes, we pixelated those, and then we tracked the roll of the ship to the with the roll of the content. And so we essentially mapped the sun to match that. So whenever the ship was flying through the canyon and the sun was moving, our vortex hotspot was moving along with that. Yeah. And at first, we pixel mapped it. We were like a direct pixel map. We're like, wait, the sun has to be exactly on that axis, and we can't really change it. The hardness of the sun is gonna always be the same. But my programmer, Derek Hoffman, he was able to just translate onto a DMX channel just the roll. So he knew where that sun was, and he was able to build the hotspot however big we needed it to be. And then he could change the softness of that hotspot depending on how we wanted that. Because if you keep it to 1 pixel on a vortex, then it's gonna shift to the next pixel, shift to the next pixel, and it feels kind of choppy. Right. But we were able to kind of keep it over 2 pixels and then fade it out, feather it out on either side, and we could change that. So again, that was like a collaboration between our brain bar and our lighting control department, and then us having that, it sold. And there was obviously like maybe a little paint out to do of the actual arch on the edges of the glass of the ship, but for so much of that, it worked. And it was such a good use case for that collaboration between a few different departments. And I think those are the main things that I think I've enjoyed overcoming, is like, I can't do it on my own with my own department. It's like we're using all these tools and everybody working together. That's when like the best outcome happens, is when everybody's working together and collaborating.
What how much do you think you're utilizing your driving units, either intelligent lights or just building in queues with like, DMX or ArtNet and or the engines driving that animation from the actual the load?
It's I would say less than you'd expect, but we have done it quite a bit. We've had wild panels where we've used like the Kino Mimics. If we want a little bit more fuller spectrum, we build walls out of those, and then we run content through those, like a low resolution video panel, but at least it has good color for reflections. We've also done where there was like a fire, like a firelight flashing on the back wall of a cave. And so we had some practical lights in the set, and we realized, oh no, like if we flicker our lights, that virtual wall ain't gonna look right.
It's gotta sync up, yeah.
So we ended up just driving their flicker. So we essentially sent them our flicker on our DMX channel, and then they were able to match the background and the virtual content to what we were doing on the real set. So, which leads me, there's another one. We did one where we had an orb. There's supposed to be an orb floating over them. This was on Mando season 3. We had an orb kind of floating as they were walking through a cavern, and it was supposed to be illuminating the cave walls.
Right.
And so we ended up putting a tracker on like a gantry, where we had a guy on some wheels like pulling it across. And so we had a tracker on that, and then as it moved through the volume, the content knew where that light was, and so it was creating like this glow hitting the sides of the walls and throwing shadows. And it was like that perfect meld of like, it's selling because it's integrated.
Yeah.
You're not having that like, oh wait, why is it not lighting up the walls and all that? So
yeah, that integration is so key. It's like, I had a similar example with fire, for example. We had a music video that we had very short prep time on, and we had full fires going on in the environment, the virtual environment, but then that needed to tie in with fire pieces on set. Now, I've actually done propane live burns within a volume, and we had to mitigate, like, had to have a fan that would blow a little bit of heat so it wouldn't like melt the panels on the ceiling. But we didn't have the time for that, nor the fire marshal or the budget to get it approved on the permit. So I was like, what the hell am I gonna do? And so my solution was, I remember going back on the old school Pirates of the Caribbean ride as a kid. And you're floating down those things, and you see the pirates, plundering the villagers, right? And they had little fire gags going on, but instead of like using real flames, on this, public tour, little boat ride, they had pieces of silk with color light underneath it flickering, and they had a fan flapping the silk. So my idea was, okay, if I can't do real fire, I can create the interactivity of the fire by having this bogus piece of white silk in a sky panel in fire mode and a fan set on top of the sky panel, and I can have this flickery, waving bit of stuff, and I cut the silks like the flames, and then we flicker it. The funny thing was, it's like, it was a substantial budget, for the artist's pocket. I'm like, oh my God, what is he gonna say when he walks out on the set and looks at this completely janky, flickery, floppy bit? And in fact, we were shooting with anamorphic lenses, and when we put the camera up, like the ones that were in the background, like we had all this rubble and stuff, but we had the sky panel and the fan hidden, and you had these little flames looking up, out of focus and anamorphic. It was like, oh my God. That looks.
Oh, it was actually in camera. It wasn't just a lighting effect. It was in camera.
When it came close to the little floppy bit, we would CG over it, right? That was the plan. Like, we could just cover it over, but we get the interactive light in the air. There's massive amounts of haze on the set, so it glowed the air, and it also flickered in a natural way to create that interactivity, because that's what you want. You wanted to have that sense of realism. Now, that wasn't like DMX controlling the flickers on the wall like you guys had. That's actually a great idea. If I had more time, that would have been fun to explore. But it still gave us that interactivity. But it was actually so effective that in the depth of field in the background with the anamorphic lenses, it was like, we don't need to CG that one. That one looks.
I love it when that happens.
So it's actually in shot that way. So I love that aspect. The one thing I wanted to also ask you about is, there's a sort of sliding scale of, let's say, ambition or budget in terms of this technique. Like a large feature with multiple weeks or months of prep and discourse about how to pull off a given sequence or a shot. may allow for better planning to pull panels and bring in big mirrors and reflection versus like a one-day commercial coming in and utilizing this. So I wanted to ask, like different sort of tools to solve those different asks. Like you'll see on this, like I have a sky panel on a Max Menace back here. Like I universally carry like 3 of these on virtual production jobs.
Yeah.
I need to get a backlight. I want to get a key light, arm it in. I can work underneath it. So I can crank it up. I think they're the best thing ever.
Yeah. They're perfect for this type of thing. Yeah.
I've bowed at the feet of Richard Mull many a time thanking him because I've been using them on every job of my career for like the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Jeff Morrell introduced me to them in the mid-2000s. Like, this is fucking great.
Yeah.
And then you go to New York and like, oh, I hate that thing. I'm like, why? You're dealing
people
with these
hate it
mansions,
'cause
you
it's-
can't bring it. I'm like, I'm like, go get one. We're on a rooftop. I arm a 4K outside of a window, bang it in through a window from we're up, 30 floors up. Like, how would you put that 4K out there? And the other, he's like, I couldn't. I'm like, exactly.
Yeah.
Or in a mansion, you can't like put wall spreaders on delicate wood paneling, and like you're getting a light up there. It's like, it's so great.
Yeah.
So
I'd say that's a great tool. I mean, we've used scissor lifts and things like that. But again, like just for budget, I think those are a perfect tool. Any kind of Menace arm, I think it doesn't have to necessarily be a Max Menace, but they are the best, I would say, just because of the way that they reach the furthest, and you don't have a lot of back end.
Right. No fulcrum.
No, exactly.
And
you don't have to have a big counterweight on it. So.
What about like things like Titan tubes or?
We use those on any show.
I got a Felix. I didn't break it out, but there's certain fixtures I love. Like
I think my main fixtures I would say are all the cream source fixtures I love.
Yeah.
We have Felix. We use a lot of the DMG fixtures, the dashes, and the Maxi mini mixes. And then we've started using a little bit of like the brighter aperture stuff, like the CS15 we used on our last show, which was super bright.
Those are like bicolor, like
they're full
2400
color.
ones. No, but they're like the output of like a 4K now.
Yeah, like the XT26, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible and fully dimmable and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Like we're getting to that point where it's like you can have full control and that brightness.
Yeah.
And the new Felix, that K40 that have you seen that thing?
Yeah.
It's insane. It's like you're finally getting to like, these are the output levels we want. Like we had a bunch rigged on a stage, and they have moto control yokes, and so we just rigged them all over the ceiling. And then it's like you could pull up a cue. We can now refocus all those fixtures back. We have our parallel sun coming in, a bunch of hot spots with those K40s. They have grids on them. I mean, there's a lot of these cool new tools coming out.
And they have like all sorts of different animation modes, like even like a sky panel, you can turn on like a police light, flashing light effect, or a fire effect, or a TV flicker, like all these. So like we would spend hours trying to come up with the most believable like TV flicker gag, coming in, or a series of lights and magic gadgets trying to create a fire flicker effect or lightning effects. Like, so all these things would be really sort of democratizing the process and getting you to an end result much easier, much quicker, and that's super exciting because it just, we should really be having like a watershed renaissance of creativity and artistic expression, right? So I think the onus is on the creators and the artists and the writers to dream up these ideas because it's easier than ever. I mean, I remember trying to come up as a cinematographer in the 90s. Like, there was no digital. There was no fucking like editing on Premiere at your house in your tighty-whities in your living room.
That was me.
Yeah, so you had to buy a film stock. You had to get processing. You had to pay for telecine. Then you had to pay for editing, whether it was like real, like 3/4 to 3/4, or if you like the early days of Avid, you had to rent the Avid Bay, and like then you had to online, and then you like everything was like a hit to your wallet. It was not easy, and then like. You're shooting on short ends, so like how old is this short end? Like your footage is all over the map in terms of the grain because you're mixing different batches, and so now it's like you could shoot cinematic quality on your iPhone compared to what you were trying to do on like some 16 millimeter short ends in 1992. So it's like this is great, and it like the onus is then again on like, well, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you exploring like in your kitchen? Getting a bottle of beer and lighting some tabletop experience, because you could create something far superior than what I was trying to do with getting the cartridges of RGB film that had the film stock in the 35 millimeter, so I can get one frame with 5218 in it and look at the slide and going, that's what it would look like had I shot this on a motion picture camera, but I'm using just the film stock and the slide film. So yeah, it's like, and then this is like literally the evolution of that idea is it's total WYSIWYG, right? You turn the camera on, you turn the wall on, and does it look good? No. Well, how do we fix it?
Yep. And that's why I think it's cool. I love that this technology is becoming a little bit more accessible, like being able to just roll in here and shoot. And I think I don't want to tell anybody to like try everything. Like I feel like some people have asked me like, what do you want to? What should you not do? I'm like, honestly, I don't even want to say, just try something. Try anything, because it's such a new technology. Like, try it, see if it works. And you'll know pretty quickly.
One of my favorite sequences you guys did on Book of Boba Fett with the whole elevator gag.
Oh yeah, the multi-floor.
I use that as an example in the masterclass of like, it's literally an analogy of the cowboy trick, right? Where like the stuntman falls and then John Wayne pops up in the frame. It's like literally like that. Like you're looking at the shot and like, okay, how are they doing this? Like, so you have like the background, he's walking, you're dollying, and then like the floor has been like CG enhanced. So you're actually looking down, like almost like a mezzanine level, like you can see further down the depth, but that's CG, but you can't tell that line. Then he goes into the elevator, you have enough time that behind him, while you're sitting in this elevator now, they're bringing in extras, they're swapping out backgrounds, they're bringing all this stuff, something that comes out of the elevator. Now you're on the same LED volume, but now it's been completely swapped out. You go in and you do that massive 360 Steadicam shot. Then you go back into the elevator, he goes down another floor, and they're moving the animation, so it looks like he's going down floors, but it's actually, he's just standing in a static little dome, right? And he goes out at another level, and it's like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, to try to pull that off in any other way.
That was all
with a reflective chrome dome character on top of it.
Yeah, but that helps sell it again too. It helps them feel immersed, you know.
I saw that in Rich Lee, one of our partners at Synapse, came up in sculpture with like Broadway shows and like Disney Imagineering with Andrew Jones. So they're like lifelong friends, and so they moved to LA at very similar times in their careers together too. So we call it like
love Andrew.
That's dope. And then that's like thinking like, okay, how can we push this technology to do something that really hasn't been done before to this degree? Like that idea of doing like the set swap out, like you pan the camera, like you've seen videos where they're panning the camera around and they come back and then the whole set's changed and they keep panning and the set's changed again. That's been done since vaudeville, right?
Yeah.
But now you're doing it with this visual effects technology and going down multiple levels with like outside the window is like literally like the galaxy, you know, and it's just super exciting. So I love all that.
And that also comes from like, you know, Andrew Jones, comes from David Klein, comes from Jon Favreau. Like all these guys are like, let's push it. Because it's easy to be like, okay, this works. We can just play into its hand and keep doing sunset shots and like last light, perfect soft light stuff. But it's like, all those guys are like, no, let's break it.
Yep.
Like Favreau would sometimes come in the morning and just be like, this might not work, and that's okay. You know, like let's push it, because if we're not pushing it, then what are we doing here? And so I think that to have like higher ups that understand that and say, hey, this might not work. You know, we might have to roto the background if it doesn't work, but like we have to try it. You know, and I think that's very important with a lot of this new technology. Just try it.
Well, the good thing with this is like it's the world's best roto, because if you're replacing it with a similar background, like let's say you had more RAVE or whatever, but your little roto edge is going to be the same tone that's compact in, and it's like that's great too. So you have all the reflections, and even if you have to do cleanup or augmentation, it's really great.
Yeah. No,
sorry, Adam, I hijacked your closure.
I honestly, what's really clear, sort of listening to you guys nerd out for a minute there, was this how. Even at the sort of cutting edge of the technology, because it's moving so fast, it feels like there's always going to be this scope for really like practical craftsmanship, imagination, and experimentation. Like it isn't as if there is a kind of, okay, we're writing the guidebook of this is how it's always going to be done. It's a really kind of human craft, right?
Yeah. Well, I am the chief innovation officer, for Christ's sake. So I gotta justify my experience on this this position.
And we will never forget it.
No, but that's the whole thing. Is it's exciting because when you pull off something that hasn't been done before, I get a tickle. Like that's why I like this technique. It's like I can look at the monitor and be like, I buy it. Yeah. That's fucking cool. I like it. So that excites me. Do I want to spend the rest of my career on never going on a location? Also, you know, like. we did a commercial in South Africa. We were on, they had all the ships from Black Sails, and they had all the pirates outfits, and we're doing this whole rum-based pirate, it's Kraken rum. So we had this commercial with all pirate ships, and we're shooting on a real, Spanish galleon. I'm like, this is kind of cool too. Like, it's pretty badass. But at the same time, this tickles me in other ways in terms of like, certainly the juxtaposition of doing the counter on a green screen set, thinking like you want to commit seppuku. Like,
no.
Only 47 more days on this blue screen and we'll be out of here.
Oh yeah.
Yes, that's why we're advocating it. That's why I'm so adamant about sort of getting the word out, trying to preach, and also educate. Like, how can we do this? How can we raise the bar for the technicians that have to work in this space and understand how to utilize this, and what we can dream about how we can take it further. Yeah.
Well, look, that's all we've got time for today. So Christopher and Jeff, thanks so much for sharing your expertise and your insights.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for hanging on here. Here's us blather. We didn't even get you one word edgewise in, but yeah, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you.
That wraps up our dive into lighting for virtual production. But do stay tuned to the channel. We're going to be hearing even more expert views from across the worlds of creativity, production, and technology. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.